Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. All right, and today's guest is Kara Goldin. Hi, Kara.
Hi, how are you?
Good. It's so good to have you on the podcast. Thank you for being a guest.
Great to be here.
Yes, and Kara is the co-founder of Hint, which is a flavored water company, but one of the top ones, if not the top, right?
Yes. We basically started the category in addition to starting a company. Well, we can talk about that a little bit, but the unsweetened flavored water, we are the largest.
That's right. So it's unsweetened, it's healthy, it is super popular. And you won so many awards and so many acknowledgments, like InStyle magazine. You won the most creative award, right? And you had an entrepreneur of the year and many other awards recognizing you for what you have done. So not only you founded, you had a different a new concept, founded a company, made it very super successful for over 16 years now. So it's really great to have you here, because I want to hear all about the journey, and I'm sure our listeners want to hear as well, and also advice from you about, the good, the bad, how you persevered and actually got it to such a success. And also, I want to talk about your book.
Yay.
So yes, Undaunted, right here, which tells, it tells about your story, and it tells about how to basically not get defeated, but keep pushing forward and being undaunted. It's like dauntless, undaunted, it's like something that, you're not being scared by things, but you just keep doing and keep having your belief in yourself, right? The belief in yourself, and keep pushing forward. So let's first of all start by telling our listeners your journey for, like, why did you start Hint?
Well, it's a very good question. So I started Hint a little over 16 years ago, and I frankly didn't even know I would be starting a company. As I just mentioned, starting an entirely new category. I had been a tech executive, had been at a company called America Online. If you're familiar with that, I was there in the very early days of America Online.
You mean AOL? You've got mail?
You've got mail. I was there in the very early days. I was part of an acquisition that was a spin out of Apple that was a CD-ROM shopping product. And America Online had invested in us. After a couple of years, we needed more capital, and America Online acquired us. And with the acquisition, they asked me to run this group called Shopping. Shopping wasn't supposed to happen. This is 1996. It wasn't quite supposed to happen yet. So it was basically, go out and talk about it and do a lot of what you had been doing with this CD-ROM disc, getting retailers onto the disc. So after 7 years, that's when I left America Online. It was $1 billion in revenue to America Online. They finally figured out after a couple of years that I actually should have revenue goals, because shopping and e-commerce, and now direct to consumer as it's called, was definitely happening. But it was during that time that I was taking a break to start my family. I had 2 young kids, and I had another one on the way, that I found myself really looking at what I was putting into my body. I had never really questioned what I had been putting into my body, primarily because I felt like I was doing the right thing. And I never had any weight issues until I got pregnant and I couldn't lose the weight that I had gained. I had also developed terrible adult acne and had been really trying everything to get rid of this adult acne on my skin. But as I was feeding my young kids and really looking at ingredients, I found that my my rules for what I was putting into their body did not apply to me. And specifically, I had been drinking diet soda, Diet Coke in particular, like it was going out of style. And one day I looked down at the ingredients and I thought, I would never give my children these ingredients. So why am I okay with giving it to me? And I thought, I'm going to put my diet soda aside for a second and see what happens if I just eliminate this. Maybe nothing will happen. Maybe I won't feel better. I didn't even really think that the weight that did come off would come off. But after 2.5 weeks of living this way, that's when I hopped on the scale and saw that I had dropped over 20 pounds. My skin had cleared up. And I asked why. Like I couldn't really figure out, I wasn't doing anything else differently. And what I realized is that this drink that I had been drinking for so many years had been really sort of causing havoc in my system and creating insulin resistance and all kinds of other things that I really couldn't define. And frankly, doctors couldn't define it for me either. So I was drinking water and to replace my diet soda addiction that I had. But the one thing with water that I always found for me was that it was boring. So while I knew I should drink more water, I really thought this isn't going to be able to happen for long. I'll probably go back to my diet soda or find another drink to drink unless I figure out a way to make it taste great. So I started slicing up fruit and throwing it in the water. Again, just thinking that I was just doing something for myself. And one day I was shopping at this new market, Whole Foods, that had opened in San Francisco. And I started looking for this product in a, ready to drink format so that I didn't have to continue buying fruit, slicing it up, putting it in the refrigerator. And I was shocked at how much sweeteners were in the aisle, the beverage aisle. And many of these drinks that I saw were things like diet soda that had these words that kind of were healthy perception to me versus healthy reality. So diet soda, vitamin, low fat, whatever the word was. And I thought, there's probably a lot of other people like me. Obviously, the diet soda industry is a huge one, but also the diet industry is a huge one. So I thought if I could actually create this product, maybe I could help a lot of people get healthy. And that's as far as I got. It wasn't until I actually got the product on the shelf and people started saying to me, former colleagues, that's so cool that you went and started a company. You're an entrepreneur. And I thought, am I? I mean, I have no idea. I was really leading with this idea of starting something that could help people, but I never really thought about starting a beverage company, taking on the soda industry, taking on big sugar or any of those things. For me, it was just about, let me go out and help a lot of people with this idea that I had developed in my kitchen and see what happens.
That's amazing. So it's all wanting to help, and then it just developed from there, which is really incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what was the first thing that you did when you decided you saw that there is actually something here that is happening, that this is a business?
Well, so I got it on the shelf at Whole Foods. I went back to the Whole Foods market where I had been shopping, and I figured out that there was a small program that Whole Foods had for local producers. And of course, I was developing it in my kitchen initially, so I was local enough. And I, figured out how to get it on the shelf. I was surprised that the 10 cases that I had dropped with the the local buyer, the day that I was actually delivering my fourth child, the morning of, trying to get it all in before I was delivering Justin. That's when I got a phone call the next day from the buyer saying, okay, it's you need to bring us a replenishment order. And I thought, wait, you sold 10 cases in a day? And he said, yes, you need to replace it right away, or I'm going to have to fill the space with something else. I really at that point thought, okay, uh, I've I'm on to something. That's great. But I had no idea so many things, like how to produce a preservative-free product, how to get distribution. Uh, Definitely had my own doubts about whether or not I could actually achieve what I wanted to achieve. I enlisted my husband to help me. He's an intellectual property attorney in Silicon Valley, didn't have experience either. But I kept thinking, if I can just make progress every single day, just do a little bit of something, live undaunted, that is the key thing to be able to build a business. And you're always going to have doubts along the way. You're going to have doubters. I had a lot of doubters, especially people who verified that I had not worked in the beverage industry. And that was the way that I was, that was, kind of setting myself up for failure even before I got started. And I thought, what do they know? Maybe I'm actually seeing an entirely new consumer. Maybe this is an entirely new category. And again, having worked in a different industry, having been a consumer of a product that was a healthy perception versus healthy reality product, I thought that is the thing that I think is most needed versus experience or, the ability to go and build something big. I thought, I don't know if it'll work or not, but why not go ahead and try and see what happens?
Oh, for sure. And then you did. So, first of all, it's an amazing story. It's so inspirational because it's very inspiring because you want to help people and you want to change the world for the better. And you found something that works and then it took off. So you were delivering your first child. It sounds like a story that we want to know more. So, and then the next morning you get this phone call. You figured out obviously how to get more cases there. And then you figured out how to get that knowledge that you needed in order to, basically create the team around you with that they have the knowledge of how to actually develop those beverages and the distribution and all of that. So tell us a little bit about the journey to grow from that point. It was 16 years ago, all the way to where the company is now in terms of the growth, these different stages that you went through.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think first of all, you touched on something that I think is really important to take a look at, which is that so often we discount our ability to actually go achieve something because we don't have the experience. And we try and define something as simple, maybe, but it's actually very complicated as saying, okay, I don't have beverage experience, therefore I can't actually launch something. Yet, having worked for incredible entrepreneurs directly or indirectly, including Steve Case, didn't work for Steve Jobs, but worked for people who had worked for Steve Jobs, had also been at CNN before, watching Ted Turner put stakes in the ground, telling everybody in the early 90s that the world needs 24-hour news. And so visionary entrepreneurs who weren't quite sure whether or not their idea was really going to make it, right? But having lived through those experiences and seeing when that hockey stick was formed, I think was super, super valid. And I think that the key thing that I saw in having worked for those entrepreneurs is the exact same thing that I thought about early, is that accept the fact that you don't necessarily have the experience and instead try and figure out where you're going to get that experience. How do you solve the problem? You don't necessarily have to look in your category. You don't necessarily have to look at other beverage executives. So, for example, when people were saying to me, oh, you need a distributor, Whole Foods was saying to me, you need a distributor early on. And I ask the Whole Foods buyer, oh, do you have a distributor's phone number, a name of somebody? And they said, well, you should be able to figure that out. And I thought, oh, well, I don't know where to figure that out. I would go and ask other beverage executives, and they would kind of keep their cards close to themselves. Yet I found that if I just went a few aisles over to the chip aisle, and I would start talking to people who were working at chip companies, I would, just have small talk with them. And I would say, oh, have you always worked in the chip industry? No, I used to work in the beverage industry. Aha. And so now I figured out, how do I find the information from people who can be more helpful than the people who are considering me a direct competitor? Which, again, I thought that that was very generous of them to think of me as a competitor. I didn't even know how to get out of the gate, but I was going to figure it out. And so little things like that, like you have a problem to solve, you have a wall in front of you, you're not going to get any further. So how do you get around the wall, go over the wall? You figure out who might else have that information that you're looking for.
Wow. Kara, what really impresses me is that you have that inquisitive spirit of play in you that, yes, it is a barrier, it is a wall. How do we overcome it, right? Who can help me? And that's, again, going to being undaunted. It's not daunting, it's not too big, but let's figure out how we can actually overcome that barrier so we can get a step closer to our goal, which is very, very inspiring. Mm-hmm. And yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's go back to growing the company. So what would you say were the major milestones in growing Hint?
Well, definitely finding distributors. Another key factor was our direct-to-consumer business, which came at a time when we were really challenged. As you can imagine, when you start to get big and people start to recognize you throughout the U.S., we were getting into more and more stores. We were actually getting the shelf space that we needed. But we were finding that we were kind of, we were a magnet, I guess, is for lack of a better word, for like competitors coming in and watching kind of how well we were doing. And we were starting to get on their radar to throw a lot of dollars at the retailers in order to prevent us. We knew we didn't have a lot of dollars to be able to go and compete with the big guys, the big soda guys. So instead, what we started looking at is, how else can we get to the consumer? Because that's really what we were trying to do. We wanted the sales. We loved being in stores, but if we had a wall that was coming in front of us that was going to block us, how else could we get to solve that problem and really get to the consumer? So we ended up thinking about other places that actually sold beverages. Early on, we had gone into Google, and many tech offices had kind of grown up in the Silicon Valley, and many tech offices that actually supplied water for and other beverages for their employees. But in addition, we started looking at things like Starbucks, which is, a major distribution point for us for a year and a half. It's a story I talk about in the book as well. But it was in 2012 when Amazon reached out to us and said, we would really like to put you as part of our this new initiative that we're working on that is really blowing out the grocery business. And it's funny because they really hadn't taken a crack at kind of heavier items like beverages. They had sort of started with some smaller items. And when they reached out, I wasn't sure whether or not it was going to work to deliver, a product like Hint to Amazon, especially where there's no sampling, all of those things. But on the other hand, I thought there are people that are walking into Starbucks. There are people that are walking into or working at Google that may want to purchase this product. And I was right. And so Amazon really helped our direct-to-consumer business take off. I think sometimes if you can find a partner that can actually help you test to figure out a concept like direct to consumer. And frankly, still to this day, I share that with many entrepreneurs, that it may not be the be all and end all for you. You're not going to get the data, for example, to be able to go back out and reach out to consumers to, remail them and resell them in some way. But it's a good place to figure out whether or not your consumer is willing to buy that way. And it was after just over a year with Amazon that we decided, because we weren't getting the data that we really wanted, and we wanted to be able to build a database to go direct with our consumer, that we decided to set up drinkhint.com. Everybody doubted it around us. Our investors, there were many people internally at Hint who, really didn't believe that it was the right thing to be doing. There were many people who saw this vision of being able to go direct with consumers as competitive with our retailers, and it would, set up a lot of channel conflict, and people would be very upset. Instead, what I really believed was something that really ties back to the mission of starting Hint, which is that the consumer controls what they buy. And oftentimes that is kind of, there's a problem that exists inside of stores where they decide for the consumer what they're going to buy based on choice. And so if we can figure out opportunities for the consumer to buy whatever we do online, then we won't be faced with consumers thinking that, for example, we only have 5 flavors. We had over 20 flavors. So that was the purpose of us setting up the direct-to-consumer business, to be able to offer our consumer everything we do in a world of distribution that they would never have everything that we do. And so, again, tested it with Amazon first. They were able to kind of prove out the concept. And still to this day, Hint is on Amazon and does really, really well. But we always have an opportunity for consumers to be able to go on to Amazon, to go on to drinkhint.com and buy whatever we do as well.
That's great. Wow, what a story. And it's that undaunted, right? I mean, nothing, it's not things that looks daunting to other people. Just you don't go there. You go, okay, well, let's how we can find a solution, or what can we do? How can we move forward? And definitely, I mean, you write it very well in this book, telling your story and giving more examples of overcoming obstacles. So, I definitely recommend. This is very easy, beautifully written, and it's easy to read. Undaunted, and you can buy it on Amazon, I would assume, right?
Yes,
absolutely.
Exactly. And also Audible. I read the book on Audible as well. So
yeah, and you're reading that book. So I always like to listen when the author actually reads the book. It's like basically having a conversation with you, So it's great. So what should we say? For me, it's a story about how not to give in to things that look daunting, right? How to overcome those obstacles, how to move forward. What was your intention when you wrote the book? Like, what did you want the listener or the reader to come out with? What's the message here? Let's say when when as a reader, you finish the book, yeah, I got this out of this book.
Yeah, well, I think you touched on it, that everyone has the ability to live undaunted, but we have to face our fears, and we have to figure out ways to keep moving forward at all times. And what I found is that, look, I have doubts along the way. I get scared, but I have to, at some point, brush myself off, however you want to view it, and continue to move forward. And I think that is a lesson that people can learn. You don't have to be born with it. It definitely, I think, successful entrepreneurs feel this way, that they don't know whether or not they will be able to make it or not and be successful. Even unsuccessful entrepreneurs. That was another thing that I wanted people to recognize too, that it's just with life, you're on a journey and you're going to have points along the way that really rock you. And you have to go and look at those things. Sometimes you can't look at them when you're in it. You have to go back, as Steve Jobs said at one point, that the dots eventually connect. And I think that that is true for everybody. If you take all of those things that maybe happened to you along the way, experiences that you've had, and use those to your benefit to keep going, I think that that's the most important piece. It's interesting. I wrote the book primarily not because, similar to, I never knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. I never knew I was going to be an author. I always enjoyed writing. But for me, I really felt like there were a whole slew of people who maybe weren't at the conferences that I was speaking at, or the companies that I was invited to come in and speak at. And I thought, if I could actually put out a book clearly for beverage or food executives, this would be an excellent book, but also for entrepreneurs, whether you're female or male or students, or this book actually has been used in business school classes, in college classes, about the mind of an entrepreneur. And I think that more than ever, I mean, this book I was writing for 4 years as I was the CEO of Hint too. I took my time to kind of write when I could, to really talk about a lot of these stories. But more than anything, what I want people to know is that entrepreneurism, it's hard. I mean, I think it's been glamorized a lot. You see the Elon Musks of the world, right? And others, Kara Goldin, right? You don't get to know everything that goes on. The average consumer doesn't know everything that goes on along the way. And I think that I hoped that it would be a story too, to share with people that life is hard, right? Everybody's got their challenges, and it's not like, you tell everybody along the way. One of our investors, John Legend, said to me, who had a preview of the book, when he read the book, he said, I kept thinking as I'm turning the pages that this is where it all gets shut down. And
I know.
And he said, but I knew it didn't get shut down. So it's, definitely something that I think people should look at. But look, Hint today is a $250 million company. Basically the idea of growing it from that first bottle, from that first idea in the kitchen, creating the product that it is today. It's only available, by the way, in the US. It's my hope that we take it to the world. I think today, as I look at where the world is today, and health, and how people are trying to figure out a lot of different ways to stay healthy, I think that the core thing is what you're actually putting into your body, how your body reacts to sweet, not just sugar, is very, very critical. And I think that the world needs a product like Hint.
I agree 100%. And I have to ask this question. It might be an unfair question, but which one is your favorite flavor?
Well, I go back to my old favorites. I have blackberry right here. This is one of the originals, not the very, very original, but I love all of them. It's like asking me my favorite kid.
I know, but I had to ask that question, which one if there is one that you prefer, that is your go-to, or maybe days that are more stressful, you go to that flavor, and then days that, I don't know, more relaxing, you go to that flavor. Just had to ask that question,
Fair question.
But it's the right answer of a mother, It's like they all have their classes, and they're all great, and they all have their purpose. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
So, Kara, quick question as we're coming to the end of the podcast. We are all about systematizing a business and helping business become more successful and more efficient by creating processes and procedures and systems. So can you tell me some of the systems that you found successful in Hint that you implemented throughout the years, or you've seen others implement, that really helped the scaling and the growth of the business?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that I always share with entrepreneurs is that again, it's easy when you're starting it from square one, I guess, when you're trying to figure out, oh, okay, I'm selling product, I need to have customer service. But being able to actually do all of the different functions and learn all of the different functions allows you to better lead a team, no matter what systems and areas that you're setting up, so that you really understand whether or not you need to, hire people internally or outsource that product as well. And I found that even over the years, when maybe people were leaving the company, that having an understanding of where we had started and where we had gotten to, but actually knowing what that group is doing and what the goals are, I think is really, really critical. So that's probably the number one thing that I've thought about in terms of organization. But I also, give a little plug for one of the systems that I really found was just absolutely critical was NetSuite. I remember thinking, it's funny because I was actually invited to do a commercial for NetSuite a few years ago from this statement. But basically, when we were looking for something that was kind of one step up from QuickBooks, which is where we started when we were first, trying to get our accounting in place, we ended up looking for the phone number for Oracle and couldn't figure out, like, where do you even start to try and figure this out? And so a friend had told me about this small Silicon Valley company called NetSuite, who later, by the way, was acquired by Oracle. But I remember reaching out to them and explaining, like, we've got this part done, but we need the next steps in terms of figuring out some of the supply chain needs and some of the other issues. And so we were one of NetSuite's very, very early customers. And I think that that's the thing that, a great example of trying to figure out, there's things that you can do internally, but then there's also programs. There are partners that you can partner with to make your business run better. And I think that that's a great example of, again, understanding the business before you're actually going out and trying to figure out what you really need.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I mean, that's what we do, is we help with the knowledge transfer, right? Documenting that tribal knowledge, it's so important, when people leave, when people come in order to get them trained, but also to understand, for executives to understand what is going on in the business so they can make it better. And I agree with you about NetSuite as well. I've done a webinar with Derek. I will put about NetSuite and how to integrate that when you actually have your processes figured out, how you integrate it with NetSuite. So I'll definitely I'll put a link to it in the notes for the podcast, because I agree with you. It's a great product. Wow, Kara, that was amazing to have you here and interview you and hear your story and really make it so it's doable for others, in terms of just believe in yourself, believe in what you do, have a great product that actually helps others, because that can push you. That can be your mission, right? Because you know that you're doing something good, and be undaunted, don't look at things as daunting, but as maybe little obstacles along the way that, it's like an obstacle course, right? You're riding the horse over the obstacles, and sometimes the obstacle is too big, but then we figure out how we do that. Sometimes we have to go around, sometimes we have to get help in order to get over it. But when you actually get to the end of it, it's definitely very rewarding.
Absolutely. And I think that that's the most important thing to remember, is that when you do get through this time, and when you do get through those periods, that's when you feel a lot of pride. You remember those moments when you weren't sure how you were going to get through those areas. But when you figure things out, it's sort of like doing a puzzle, right? That you don't have the picture for. You're so excited that you were able to get it to a certain point. That's what I think life is about, that you're going to have challenges. The biggest lessons, I think, are learned when you didn't know how to tackle things initially, but you just did. You figured it out. And I think that is the biggest message I want to leave with people, that you can do a lot more than maybe you even think you can. But the first step is figuring out how to move forward.
For sure. Absolutely. So before we end off, I would like to give a big shout out and thank you to Captain Hoff that introduced us. And he was on my podcast as well. We had a great episode. So our listeners, check it out. And I'm really grateful that he did, because it was great having you here and listening to the story. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.